everyone, thank you very much for watching or listening. Liam Hartree here today with another episode of Presenting Champions, and today I've got a very special guest. Been very excited to interview this man for a long time, so it's great to finally have him on the show. Colin Mcmillan, ladies and gentlemen, who many people would know, known as Sweet C, former WBO World Champion at Featherweight, former Commonwealth Champion at Featherweight, British Champion at Featherweight, has had an illustrious professional career, an illustrious amateur career. You can see some of the trophies from that there as well, just behind Colin. Today we're going to be having a chat about his life and career, everything that he achieved in boxing, which is so much, as well as his life post-boxing as well. So we're going to be getting into some good stuff. But before we get into that, champ, I will say once again, just thank you for making the time for this. It's a pleasure to have you on here. Thank you.
My pleasure. No worries at all.
Absolutely fantastic. So as I mentioned just now before we actually started recording, talking about your life right now in 2022, with these interviews, some people will know all about what you're doing and all about your career. Some people won't have a clue. Some people will be in between. So I try and cater for a bit of everything. So for people who don't know, some of what you're working on right now in 2022, how is life for you? Talk us through a little bit about what you're working on day to day, and I think we'll start there if that's okay with you, champ.
Yeah, no problem at all. I mean, obviously, I think for all athletes, it's a very short career, and I think it's very important to think of life after boxing. One thing I'm very strong on, and I try and instill in young people is the importance of trying to get an education, because sometimes after your career, it might not go according to plan. And if you've got an education, at least you can try and go in a different direction and kind of rebuild yourself. And fortunately for me, at my height, I had an injury, and obviously, I had to retire, but I was able to go in different directions. So, fortunately for me, after my retirement, I kind of done some promotional work for a nightclub. Then I started managing Audley Harrison when he won the Olympics back in the day. Professional secretary for the Professional Boxers Association with Graham McGuigan and Nicky Piper. And present day, I say I'm quite lucky. I'm still involved in boxing, but more from the outside. I'm a consultant, stroke mentor for two young fighters, Hamza Shiraz and Umar Khan, and they're both undefeated, both doing really well. Hamza's just been voted Boxing Writers Fighter of the Year. So we're going down to the Savoy later, where he's going to collect that award. So that's been taking up quite a lot of my time. I also set up my own charity. So we go out to schools, put programs or non-contact programs in schools in the local area. As I say, boxing's been good to me, and I think a lot of people now realise that boxing brings a lot of benefits to young people. The work ethic, the self-confidence, the confidence. It's a great character builder, and I think a lot of schools are understanding that it's not, simply two guys going there and bashing the brains out of each other. There's a lot more that goes on to it. So I've been doing that, developing that for over 8-9 years, and that's going kind of well. Obviously, been doing a little bit of charity work during that period. So I was fortunate enough to receive the British Empire Medal in the Queen's New Year's and Honours List a couple of years ago. So I've been quite busy. I mean, I'm quite lucky that I've got a situation where I've retired. Financially, I did okay. I kind of invested my money in a couple of properties and that, so I've done okay from the game. So hopefully, life can continue, and it's a hard career. So when you get to a certain age, you want to sit back and start to enjoy it a little bit if you can.
Absolutely, well said. There's some really good work you're doing there. I'd heard bits and pieces about it, but when sort of researching for this, I realised the extent of it, and I just love that you're giving back, to the new generation. That's not even a question, but just me saying it is wonderful work you're doing. So we will take a step back, I think, to talk about your career itself. Now, with this today, I've decided to focus more on the professional side of things for time. Although you had an illustrious amateur career as well, so it's difficult to pick certain key fights because you had so many good ones, amateur and pro. But touching on it with starting with with the pro ranks, and I know we are jumping over a bunch of stuff there, so my apologies, but for time we'll do that. Starting with the pro ranks, you obviously had the early success winning your first two fights before there was a small hurdle, which we'll get to in a moment. But before we do, can we go all the way back in time to your professional debut and your memories from that time. With this, I'd like to get a feel for your expectations of your career at that time. In other words, you went on to achieve a lot. Well, you'd already achieved a lot as an amateur, but you went on to achieve a great deal as a professional. At that time, when you started with your pro debut, mentally, how were you feeling about your career? Was there excitement for the road ahead? Was there trepidation? Was there a difficult adaptation to the pro ranks? So I had to get a feel for where your mindset was at that time, if that's okay, champ.
Yeah. I mean, for me personally, I mean, my aim as an amateur was always to go to the Olympics, like Muhammad Ali and Sugar, and those were the guys who I kind of respected and admired. And I wanted to try and follow in their footsteps. So when I got to the Olympic squad, but I lost to Dave Anderson, who was selected ahead of me in the national final in the split decision. So he went, and I had to, decide what I wanted to do. So obviously I decided to turn professional. If you've got an Olympic gold or something behind you, it makes that path a lot easier.
Yeah.
So I knew from then that I didn't. Things were going to be a bit harder for me. But I spoke to various promoters, and there wasn't loads of interest. The people were interested, and then I spoke to, I think it was former world champion Terry Marsh, and he said to me, "Why don't you think about managing yourself and doing it your way? That's if you want to do that, I'll come on board as your manager, manage you until you get to a stage where you can take over your affairs and that." So for me, I knew the path that I would take wouldn't be easy, you know. But the fact I always believed that I had the ability to go on to become a world champion from the early days, and I just knew I was in the jungle, and I'd have to kind of like fight my way out of it, and hopefully things will work out for me.
Yeah, it is interesting, and as I mentioned before, it is valuable for young up and coming athletes as well, which I try and give those sorts of things a mention to sort of get into the mindset of fighters as well as the physical aspect. So it's good to touch on that. Now, as well as this, early on in your professional career, you mentioned that you knew you were in for sort of a harder road, and there was a small hurdle that happened in your third professional fight, I believe, where you were actually stopped with cuts, which was obviously a little bit of a setback, especially given your amateur accomplishments as well. So at that time, were you shaken by that, or did you just feel that it was one of those things that happens in boxing, and you obviously carried on, you're obviously back in there, back in the ring quick enough? Was it something that affected you? How did you find the faith to continue with that setback?
To me, see, obviously on your record it goes down as a loss, but I think with Alan Mackay, and I've beat him twice in the amateurs already. I think once one occasion I stopped him, and I outpointed him the other time. So for me, I never viewed it as a loss. It was just unfortunately the clash head, the cut opened, and it was quite a bad cut. And I think for me, it just kind of like brought home how unpredictable boxing can be. Precocious, any little thing can change. That could have been the end of my career. I was fortunate at the time that Terry Marsh and Ambrose Mendy rushed me to the hospital when I had microsurgery, and they did a great job and repaired the damage to the eye. But it showed me, or really impressed upon me, just how precarious boxing can be, and anything can happen, and your career can kind of like change just like that. And when the fight happened, obviously I noticed, obviously promoters, when you started to speak to promoters after that, they viewed you as a beaten fighter, regardless of the fact that it was only a cut eye. So obviously it created more problems. But I think sometimes it just makes you more determined to go to achieve and kind of like go on from there and prove people wrong.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's true because on paper, these things are always not what they seem. It's part of the reason I wanted to mention that one, and it's also because in the age that we're in with Floyd Mayweather and all these people and everyone wanting to be unbeaten, it shows that a loss, even though it's a loss on paper, obviously, but that sort of thing, it doesn't affect a fighter's career that way. I mean, people can bounce back from that. Many great champions have come back stronger, from losses. So I think it's a valuable lesson there, which is why I've picked that one, and especially a valuable lesson for anyone up and coming in the amateurs or what have you. Listen up, guys. So moving on from there, you were winning everything. I mean, obviously you had stoppages, you had points wins. There was quite a few wins, but skipping over a few of those because I know we're skipping a few fights ahead now to come to the British title, and there was quite a few wins in that span, by the way, for anyone that doesn't know. Coming to the British title itself, and I know like I say, I've tried to pick key ones here. In itself, at that time, I'd like to get into the preparations for the fight itself, and how you were feeling before it, before we get to the fight itself. So obviously coming up on a big opportunity like that, having won all but one, as you know, as we've touched on. Um, I have to remember how many fights there were between that loss and between the British title, but it was quite a few. So coming up on the build up for the British title, can you walk us through the? I don't have a specific time scale, but whether it's weeks out or months out, and I'm not just talking about when the fight was announced, but just when you were coming to that point in your career that you knew you were ready for a major title, the build up to it. Let's talk about that time a little bit. Let's go back to that time, if that's okay, please, champ.
Yeah, sure. I mean, around about that time, I was kind of like I was doing quite well. Obviously, like ITV liked me. A lot of my previous fights were shown on ITV. You know, obviously, Frankie. By then, he'd obviously started to recover from the shooting incident at Barking Town Hall. So you know, ITV really liked me. So it was kind of a great time for me. So you know, expectations were high, and going into that fight, you know, Gary Doo had a great fight with Sean Murphy to stop Sean Murphy. So you know, people were really talking about the fight itself because obviously they saw whether or not I was the real deal or not. So you know, I knew you know from speaking to Gary and seeing him before, I knew that he was a very confident guy. You know, he was a puncher, and he was one person that in the circuit people had always said stay away from him. You know, he's a banger. He can take you out. He's a good fighter. And like for me, he was a kind of like I was always really really confident. And I knew it was a time for me to kind of like shine and make my mind. I say, well, I had the setbacks in the amateurs. You know, I was nearly I lost an split decision in two ABA finals, twice I thought I had won. But you know, for me to become a champion, you know, that would something someone can't take away from you. So you know, for me, I was really really determined, and that was my mindset. I mean, what did happen was a few weeks before the actual fight, I played a charity football match and I'd done my leg in. So that was a problem going into the fight, which I didn't really want. So I had that at the back of my mind. But regardless of that, I still felt I'd be good enough to win the fight, and I look forward to it because as I say, for me it's the first step on that ladder to going on to become a world champion. So I knew it was going to be a tough, hard fight, but I was looking forward to it.
It's fantastic. I mean, yeah, it's good to get a feel into the mindset as well that you were that you were in on the build up to it. Talking about the fight itself. Now with this, obviously, talking about the fight itself, there's so many different things that we could go into. There's different aspects of the fight, but looking at it broadly, because obviously you were the one who was there, not myself. I mean, I wasn't even born there, so obviously everything I'm sort of pulling together with this is always sort of going back with research. But seeing the fight and researching the fight, there's a lot of different aspects, including what you said is some people warned you apparently not to even take it. But by the time you were actually in there and you were actually boxing him and it was going on, your key memories now, this many years later, of a fantastic achievement, and I have to say, obviously, a fantastic era as well that you were part of. That has to come into it because winning a British title, it's always an achievement, but winning British title in your era, I think is different again to now. No disrespect to anyone today, but talking about the fight itself, what are your key memories from it now? This I'd like to get a little bit about what it felt to actually win, what it actually felt to become champion. But when we're getting into the fight itself, basically, what is it about it that outside of the achievement of becoming British champion that sticks with you? This many years later, as good memories, bad memories from that particular fight. Let's just get into it a little bit in your own words. I think is the best way to come at this one.
Yeah. I mean, I think that fight it had generated quite a lot of interest. I think Gary had looked very good when he stopped Sean Murphy, and a lot of people thought he might be too strong for me. And during the fight, he was very very strong. So I thought while I had the injury on my leg and all, I couldn't move as well as I would have liked. I had to stay on the ropes a little bit, and done my own version of a rope a dope and try to let him punch himself out a little bit. But as I say, I was confident in my ability, and I knew that if I kept on chipping away, gradually, he would, it would have some kind of effect, and that's what happened. He came forward, landed a few decent shots, but obviously, I kind of like wasn't Julie worried. And yeah, I was able to kind of like break him up, break him down, and eventually I think I stopped in I think the 7:48 round. So yeah, it was a real good performance. At a large, good crowd at the London Arena who came to see it, and I think in March, a lot of people, started to take notice and started to believe that I had potentially the ability to go on to become a world champion.
Mm. And you certainly proved them right with that one, which we'll get to very shortly. So even though we're racing through this, because there's other aspects of boxing that I'm going to pick your brains about a little bit shortly, which is why it's sort of partly key fights and then partly other aspects of boxing. Obviously, there was a defence of the British title as well, which was also a seventh round stoppage victory as well. Then we come to the Commonwealth belt, which is also an incredible achievement. Now, with this one, it's the same type of thing. I mean, the fight, talking about the fight in your own words, and the reason I don't always hone in on this particular round or this particular thing, because so many times in interviews I've done that, and it's not actually the thing that sticks out in the fighter's own mind. If you get what I mean, you can say, oh, there was a knockdown in this round or whatever, and they say, yeah, I don't really remember that. What actually sticks in my mind was such and such. So that's the reason that coming at it more broadly, because you were the one who was in the ring and watching the fight and being in the fight. It's a totally different thing. So the Commonwealth, winning the Commonwealth title, an incredible achievement. With this one, as well as talking about the fight itself, I'd like to get a little bit of a feel for how people around you were reacting, obviously, to you winning major titles at this point. I'm sure it was expected, but still, from family and friends, that's something that people on the outside, looking in, so to speak, don't always see. So it'd be good to get a feel for that. But also, the fight itself, again, very similar to the British title. This many years later, what actually sticks in your mind from the fight? What are the fond memories of it? What are the maybe difficult memories of it? What stands out to you when you reflect on the Commonwealth win this many years later?
Yeah, I think as you said there, I think as my career kind of progressed, people were kind of getting behind me, and like anything, it's like a momentum. That I had some good fights, some good wins. Everything seemed to be kind of going in the right direction, and that was the next step, to that ultimate ambition of becoming a world champion. So I think people around you can see that things are improving. Now you are making inroads to go on to become a champion. So they kind of get behind you and support you. And like anything, I think it's a momentum which kind of builds. And I think a lot of fighters do that. You kind of things start working, and it's what you need. I mean, the fight itself, I think, is against Percy Comey from Ghana. He used to be, I think, a Zuma Nelson sparring partner. And like for me, I always remember it because I looked at him at the weigh-in and that, and he was tall and slim and skinny and that. And in my mind, I thought, wow, this guy, like, I'm going to break him up. And that's going through my mind. And you should never kind of like underestimate, sorry, anybody. So in the back of my mind, I thought, oh, I'm going to be too strong for him and everything else. But come fight time, he proved to be, very resilient, very strong, very awkward. And yeah, he made it a tough fight for me. Wasn't one of my better performances. I had a slight cold like going into the fight, but besides that, he was a good fighter, and he made it difficult for me. So I was kind of like having to kind of get that out of the way, and then look toward the future. After that, it was one step down and onto the next one.
Mm, absolutely. And with that in mind, obviously we're pretty much coming up on the world title itself. Well, actually, we're right up on it at this point. Winning the Commonwealth title, I mean, that obviously really propelled you. I know there was another, I think it was another sixth or seventh round stoppage, wasn't there? After, yeah, actually, yeah, just after winning the Commonwealth title. Then we come to the world title itself, which is obviously, I think, what you're known for. But I wanted to give some of those other belts that I mentioned because they are tremendous wins in their own right. But coming up on the world title, I mean, this is one that it's almost like, where do we start with this one? It's an incredible achievement, and it's obviously the fulfillment of your lifelong dream pretty much by the sound of it to that point. So it's an amazing one to touch on. A lot of fighters never get the chance to actually get there. Even when they do get there, they come up short. But you actually did it. So in your own words, becoming world champion, achieving the dream. We'll talk about the fight itself, but I'd really like to get a little bit inside your head with this one. Basically, I don't know how to put that, but in terms of what it actually feels like, I mean, you achieved that after all the years of sacrifice, dedication to training, the highs and the lows. So much that goes into boxing behind the scenes. I've asked various champions this on this show. A lot of them say they can't put it into words. You know, when they actually win a world title, some of them can put it into words and they try their best. But when you actually achieve it, I mean, and you know you've won the fight and everything like that in that moment, what goes through your mind in a moment like that? I know we're sort of skipping the fight itself, but we will touch on that. But what actually goes through your mind when you realize I finally done this, I finally got to the summit of the mountain, if you like. You get where I'm coming from with this. I hope.
Yeah, yeah, and I think it's kind of it's probably it's elation because, as I say, going into the fight, you condition yourself, and what makes you tick is all the years of sacrifice, all the things you've kind of been through, all the sacrifices, all the struggles you've had, and as I say, from a very early age, from when I was 15, 16, that had been my dream. So to have that in front of you within touch and distance and to go on to become world champion, as you say, it's very difficult. It's a lovely experience. It's kind of like it was a great feeling, and like not only for myself, but there's a lot of people along the way who supported me and helped me, trainers, agents, all my fans and all my supporters and family, and like not only for me but for them and all. They've been on the journey, so to actually get there and say, you know what, I've done it. All the amateur setbacks I had, you know, all the people who kind of like knocked you, said you weren't going to make it, you weren't good enough or whatever. It's a great kind of feeling because you've made your mark as a world champion, but no one can ever take that away from you. And you've proved, and obviously they've got a different version of world championship, but you've proved that you're a world champion. So it was a real special moment for me. I mean, obviously during the fight, I think there was some kind of controversy with the German judge. They announced it, him as the winner first of all, so it was a split decision, and they corrected it, and it was unanimous. So even at that point, I thought to myself, wow, I could be, could have gone wrong for me, but like when they announced me as the world champion, yeah, I felt it was great. It was great.
Mm. It is amazing, and it's something that I try and ask people because it's a little different because people ask about the fight in this round and that round, but getting into actually what goes through your head to actually get there because it is so many years. It's something words can't really do it justice. The amount of work that boxers put in to actually get there. So actually getting there, it is an amazing thing. But yeah, as soon
That
as
was
you
that
touch.
part. What I would like to say. I mean, obviously, for me, the fight also had other significance because, as I said, when I first started, my aim had always been to go to the Olympics like Roy Leonard and Muhammad Ali and get my gold medal. Obviously, I missed out on selection, but in Mauricio Stecker, I fought a guy who went to the Olympics. He went to the Olympics, he got a gold medal, and he got the Val Barker Award for the best boxer of the tournament. So for me, beating him in some ways kind of made up for the fact that I didn't go to the Olympics, but I still beat an Olympic champion. So kind of like that made it even more um, pleasing for me.
Yeah, that makes sense actually. It sounds like it almost sort of righted the wrong there, so to speak.
Yeah,
From what
yeah,
happened in the past, and that's very cool. See, I mean that's the type of thing that you don't always realize that's going through your mind from the outside, but it's a really good insight. Before we move past that, you also mentioned the controversy that happened, and I'm glad you brought that up actually because at the time of the announcement and all that sort of thing. Were you confident that you had won it, but you thought that you might get sort of robbed there, or was it at that time? Was there sort of in your mindset? Was there sort of a low and then a high, or were you confident that they'd rectify it the right way?
Now, come fight time, I think I definitely dominated. Proved I was the better man. I think obviously the earlier rounds were kind of quite close, but by the fifth, fourth, fifth round, I started pulling away. So in my mind, I was very confident that I'd won the fight. But as we said before, I've seen boxing so many times that strange things can happen, and until that decision is made, you can't relax and expect anything. So I was really really confident. I knew I'd won the fight. Whether or not I would get the decision, sometimes it's a different matter. Sometimes, so it always got a little doubt. And when I heard the split decision, again, my mind started ticking over, and I was a little bit, here we go again. But eventually they made the right decision. But yeah, I was champion of the world.
Incredible, absolutely incredible. And another thing before we move on to subsequent fights and get into some other stuff, the immediate aftermath of becoming world champion as well. How how is that? I mean, I've been around a lot of world champions either on here or in the media space, so you sort of get a feel for everything goes crazy and everyone wants to talk to and everything just sort of blows up and sort of obvious things like that. But immediately after becoming world champion, life for you, I mean, just day to day life now, just just going down the street, just doing normal stuff. What sort of changed? What are some of the transitions? Because I've seen this firsthand where sometimes people have very very big following before they become world champion. And obviously you still had a lot of following at the time. I know that, but still I've seen it go crazy. Then some people I've seen, it's like they their profile goes through the roof. After that time, so it's different. From your point of view, day to day life, celebrations, in the immediate aftermath, I'd like to, if aftermath is the right word, you know what I mean. I'd like to touch on that, like just the days and weeks immediately after, what you did and how life went for you, walking around as world champion, basically.
Yeah, it was kind of great actually. Back in those times, I think boxing was on terrestrial TV, on ITV. So as you say, so a lot of people, I think over 7 million people watched the fight. And as you say, wherever you go, people will recognise you and know you. So yeah, you kind of like but it's what you've been working for all your life. I think I I got married a couple of weeks after that. We flew out to St. Lucia. I got married in that with my wife because we've been together, since we were teenagers. But that was nice. And as you say, when you come back as a world champion, everything kind of changes. And, things are coming from more directions. And sometimes, for all fighters, I think you've got to try and take stock and not get carried away with the hype and everything else because you know people like Marvin Hagler. Sometimes it's hard to become a world champion, but it's even harder to keep that. You still got to kind of keep your wits about you, keep your feet on the ground, and then kind of like go from there. So it's difficult sometimes because you're getting calls to do this interview, this so come here, do this, do that, and in amongst it, you've got to try and stay focused and kind of keep yourself focused. And for me, my aim is not only to become a world champion, but be the undisputed champion. I wanted to go out there and I wanted to fight the other versions of the championship to prove that I was the number one. That was always my aim and objective.
Absolutely, yeah. Again, it gives us a little insight into the things that people don't always see or don't always read about. And there's stuff out there, but it's good. Now, obviously, coming into your next fight after that, I think this is sort of equally well known about the injury, shoulder injury, that you sustained, and it's pretty much a bit of a tragic situation, really, because obviously, if that hadn't happened, I think there would have been other defenses, and it possibly would have gone in a different direction, which is must be difficult for you. But talking about that fight in itself, I mean, this one's a bit of a possibly a bit of a downer, by comparison to the high. But we've got to get the highs and lows to give it that feel. Shoulder injury happened in that fight, so obviously you lost your world title. It was very difficult, very very difficult situation. I mean, with that situation at the time, walk us through a little bit about what happened first of all for people who don't know, but also it's the same type of thing, just like we were talking about after the world title for how you celebrated on the app. With this one, I'd be interested to get into how you sort of basically coped with the down of this situation a bit, and how you, because obviously it has to be said that you did bounce back from this? I mean, there were more fights. There was another, obviously, world title challenge as well, which we'll get to in a moment. There was, you got back in there. I mean, I can see some people just packing it in at that point, with a disappointment like that. But in your own words, please walk us through, the fight and what happened. I mean, some people will know, some people won't know, but again, in your own words, and the immediate aftermath of that one, including sort of what inspired you to bounce back, basically. 'Cause that's what I'm getting at, is how you bounce back from a rough situation. So yeah, let's talk about that a little bit, please.
Yeah, obviously the first defence was against the Colombian Ruben Palacio, and I see him fight, and I think at that kind of level, all fighters are going to be a decent standard in that. Um, I looked at him, I thought he'd be okay. At that time, we were looking towards the unification fight because Paul Hutchinson was the WBC champion, and we was, that's where we were aiming at. And particularly after my performance against Decker last time, everybody thought he was a foregone conclusion. But in a title fight, the challenge is always going to come in hungry, and he was very rough, very tough. He came out there swinging, caught me for a couple of left hooks and that. And I was winning the fight, but obviously during I think the seventh or eighth round, I went to throw a left hook. He came in underneath it, lifted up, and then my shoulder got dislocated. I carried on for I don't know 30 seconds or whatever, and eventually the corner saw that and the referee saw that, and the fight was stopped. And it was devastating because you know we talked a little while ago about how you've worked so hard for something, and then you envisage, okay, you've made it now, that you're going to go to the next chapter, and then all of a sudden, everything's taken away from you. You've lost the fight, you've lost the championship, and more importantly, you've got an injury which you don't know how it's going to respond. I think at that time, I didn't realise how serious the injury was. You're still relatively young. You think to yourself, okay, I've got to try and do what the physio say, do a certain thing, and I will, regain or become what I was before. I didn't realise just how serious that shoulder injury was going to be and how much it was going to hamper, my career. But when it happens, you've just got to pick yourself up again, and you've got to, do the rehabilitation. Start working through the physio. I had an operation, finally putting it on, and I put a pimple on it, but the pin didn't work. And it's just about trying to rebuild and kind of get back to where I thought I should be. It was difficult. You've got your sponsors who, shifted off. They wanted to part company, and like anything else, people love a winner. When you lose, sometimes you see things start changing and things start changing. Then you've got to be mentally strong because if you're not, it can affect you. And for all fighting, you've got to, I say try and keep yourself grounded because no matter how good you are, you're going to win, but you're also going to lose. Only a few fighters have been able to go through their whole career undefeated, and it's part and parcel of life. For me, that's the way I kind of I viewed it, and it was just a matter of trying to refocus myself to get myself back to condition to go again and become world champion.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as I mentioned, it is a sad situation. It is very, very commendable, how you bounced back from that and how you came back from like a huge disappointment there and obviously carried on with your career. I know that that shoulder injury sort of dogged you a bit, and we'll get to that as the sort of the last chapter of your career before we get into a few other boxing subjects. But before we do, I need to give this a mention as well. Your fight with Steve Robinson, where you challenged for the world title again, the same belt. Now I know Steve quite well actually because he's local. I'm in Wales, and he's local to here, and his son Jacob, and just fought for the Commonwealth title, and they're a lovely family. So I want to give this a little mention as well because obviously this also highlights what I was just mentioning, that you got right back in there to a very high level. I mean, this is something that you weren't really sort of bouncing around at a lower level, beating even ranked guys. I mean, even if you come back and fought somebody who's ranked sort of, third or fourth or whatever, but you got right back in there for basically another world title shot. So with that one, I think it's a sort of valuable fight to mention. I know, obviously that fight didn't go your way, but it's still a valuable fight to mention that you got right back in there to right at the top of the tree, really.
Well,
So,
to be fair, what happened in that situation was when I'd lost the title fight to um, Ruben Palacio, I was actually ahead on the scorecard, and when the referee stopped it, it was stopped due to an accidental injury. And if they had followed the guidelines, I should have still become champion. I stopped the fight, go to the scorecard, and I would have become champion. That was the reason why I was able to get the immediate rematch with Steve when when the shoulder had healed. But not only that, another reason why I didn't take a warm up fight was, you know, prior to that, I had tried to fix the shoulder. I had a metal pin put in, and while I was sparring with Johnny Armour in preparation for the fight, it had actually the shoulder had sublux had actually come out, so I knew the shoulder wasn't 100%. And at that time, see, financially, it's not football. It's not like I'm sorry, boxing's not like football where you can kind of you're going to get paid every week. If you don't fight, you don't win. If you take a an easier fight, a warm up fight, whatever, and the shoulder goes. That payday you've kind of got is going to fall out the window. So I had to actually go straight into the fight with Steve, knowing that the shoulder wasn't 100%. And then prior to the actual fight, I had already booked a trip to America to have microsurgery on the shoulder after the fight. So I knew it wasn't 100%, but I still felt within myself I had enough ability to beat Steve. But he's very very strong, very fit, and obviously he had home advantage in that, so he was able to come out on top.
yeah. Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, it makes sense why we got back in there. I've always thought it was strange as well. It's a good thing you mentioned that about the Palacios fight because with that stoppage, yeah, I mean, it should have been. I mean, for example, I'm another person I know quite well around here, Lee Selby. When he won the IBF featherweight title, that was a clash of heads. But because he was ahead on the scorecards, obviously, they give him the belt, well deserved. Things like that happen all the time. So, it is a bit strange with that one fight that they listed as a loss. I thought that when I was researching for this, but strange things do happen in boxing.
Yeah, it was that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean there's some things you see which you just think what happened there, and it's the only place to put it. But yeah, it's good to give that a mention. But no, jumping right back in there with Steve, it's still a great achievement as well, which is sort of my reason for mentioning that. So obviously you were continuing after Steve. You were continuing getting wins, some good quality wins in there as well. There were some stoppages, there were some points wins, but you were continuing with your career. Now, as I mentioned before, I'd like to get into a few other boxing related things. So looking at this one more broadly, coming into the later part of your career, what was happening with the shoulder? Because there was still some high level fights here. There were still some good wins. Most of the guys had winning records and things like that. So you were still very much in the mix for a lot of stuff. But your shoulder was obviously still dogging you, as many people will know. Later on in your career, it sort of became a bit of an issue again. But when it comes into the latter part of your career, when did you start to realize? I know this is quite a big question because it encompasses a few fights. When did you start to realize that you wanted to hang your gloves up, basically? That you weren't. I'm not sure exactly what went through your mind, but you weren't performing to the same level. I know obviously the injury was playing up again as well, so that was a fact. That was a big factor in this. But can you walk us through? It's not so much one fight, but this time, because after Steve, you were winning again. You had a run of good wins, quite a few of them. How was your career developing at this point with the injury, with your mindset, with your aim for becoming world champion again? Going to encompass this
It,
closeout.
it, it was it was a difficult time for me, to be fair, because I think at the time obviously Frank Warren was my promoter, and he had said, like, get 3 wins and you'll fight for the world title again. But during the interim, I think Steve fought Naz, and Nathim became world champion. And I always get my 3 wins out of the way, and then fight for a world championship. But that didn't happen, and it was difficult because, as you say, my shoulder, when I was training and everything else, you I always, felt there was an issue there. Before, whenever you're throwing a punch, you can do it instinctively, and you don't get that speed, that snap. But once you've had a shoulder injury like that, you become a lot more deliberate. And at that kind of level, you're only talking about fractions of seconds. But it makes a difference. So if you look at my fights, pre pre the injury and post injury, you can see the difference. See that I'm a lot more deliberate. I'm trying to plant my feet a little bit more because I can't afford to do the thing which I did naturally before. And it was something. But when you're a fighter, you always think to yourself, okay, carry on working, carry on hitting the bag. You're going to get stronger. It's going to get better. It's going to heal. And that's what goes through your mind, and that's what I thought was going to go through my mind. Eventually, you will be able to work at it and get it back to where it was, until the last fight, and then obviously after that, I decided myself, I still felt I could still improve, but you know, do you have the appetite to kind of go back? Once you've fought for your title and everything else, it's very difficult to get yourself motivated to fight yourself, back in the jungle again, and you fight young, hungry guys. And I always said, I never wanted to be a fighter where people using me as a scalpel. I beat him. So for me, when I had the Paul Ingle fight, which is the last fight, you know, I thought, it's time to call it a day. I realised then I wasn't going to be, the fighter that I used to be before, and it was time to kind of call it a day and move on from there, because I never wanted to be, a punch bag, or a scout for any of the young guns out there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's good that you avoided that, because you do see some champions, end up in that position, and it's not a good place to be for a lot of reasons. Respect, obviously their health, all different reasons. So yeah, and I know that's a big question encompassing the end of your career, but it's very much the highs and the lows. Moving into a couple more things towards the sort of tail end of this talk. Getting your thoughts on some broader topics, some broader sort of boxing related topics. So this will be things like, obviously, your thoughts on boxing then versus now. Advice for young athletes. Certain things like that are bigger questions. But before we get into that, I do have to ask. One of the things that often comes up, that is sort of quite a fan-friendly question for me, that I put in most interviews, because it's just a very popular question. People often ask about toughest fights and everything like that, and people often ask, oh, which was your toughest fights? And I get a lot of people asking me to ask that, if you get what I'm saying. So hence I say it's a fan-friendly one. Because I do a lot of this for other fighters, but as soon as the fans will be watching as well. When you look back on your career and toughest fights, and obviously tough can encompass different things. I mean, it can encompass hardest hitters, it can encompass technical aspects, it can encompass obviously having an injury that people didn't know about, like you mentioned, the leg with one fight. So, in your own words, when you look back, which one, or maybe more than one, was the toughest fight of your career, where you had to really dig deep? And also, what is the reason why behind that particular fight, whichever one that may be? Let's touch on that just for a moment.
I mean, I think, as you said, it's quite a difficult question because you get all types of difficult fighters. You get someone like Percy Comey, who was, very awkward, very, made things difficult for you. Or you get someone like Palacio, who was a rough and tough, and that swinging shots and that. He caught me a couple of times, shook me up a little bit a couple of times. That was quite a toughish kind of fight. I think those two, were quite tough. Or Dean Phillips, I think, when I fought him on the comeback show, he was the first person to put me down. Um, and I outboxed him after that. But that's the first time I've ever been put down in my career. But they're all different types of. And I don't think I've got one particular fight where I can say, that was the toughest one. But those are, I think, the three. I was that bad to me as being, quite, quite tough. Yeah. Also,
Yeah,
actually, I tell a lie. I mean, obviously you've got the Paul Ingle fight, which is my last fight. To be fair, maybe that fight, and that wasn't. Um, That was that's a funny kind of fight because I always felt in control, but he was young, he was hungry, he kept on punches, and I always thought to myself, he would punch himself out. But yeah, he had tremendous work rate, and he just kept on punching, 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 and I wouldn't say hurt. It's just that mentally, he just took a breather, and after that, the fight was over. So he would have to be out there too. I think those are the fights which really stick out in my mind as being the toughest one for me.
Makes sense. It does make sense. I mean, like I say, it's a very big question, because it encompasses all different things. But it's still one that that people love. It's always popular, that one. So there we go. Moving into some, as I mentioned, some broader topics about boxing for the tail end of this, because we've gone into some really good stuff so far. Advice for young boxers, young athletes. I think this one is an interesting one, because oftentimes I ask this of champions or ex-champions or what have you, and a lot of the answers can sort of involve life as a whole. It's not just about boxing. It's things you can actually apply to life. But whether it's something you apply to boxing itself, I don't mind. That's all good. I know that obviously you're giving back to the sport, and we talked about that at the beginning. You're doing some very good work, and I know that people can obviously ask you if they want to know certain things. But given that this interview will have a wide reach, because I'll be sort of marketing this to obviously around the UK, Europe, the States, all different places. It's good that you could give a little bit of advice to up and coming fighters, whether they're amateurs, whether they're just turning pro, whatever it may be, or maybe two or three ingredients that you regard to be essential to succeed in boxing. Now, obviously, there's probably more advice you could give than just two or three. But if you think of it like cooking, there's certain key things you've got to have in there to make it a good meal. If there's certain things that you have to have in there to do well in a boxing career, in a sports career, and I know this is quite broad, but you're obviously, given everything you've accomplished, you're in sort of prime position to pass on just a little bit of knowledge. So, what would you say to those young guns who are out there now, and they're sort of there, basically where you were, those years ago? I'm going to be world champion. I'm going to do something big. I'm going to make a name for myself, provide for my family, whatever it is. What would you say to them is important, to do so that they actually do accomplish some of that, or at least have their best shot at it anyway?
It's a very difficult question because there's so many different areas you can touch on, which
Mm.
can be beneficial. I mean, I always said it from before, you know, you've got to get an education to, in case boxing doesn't work out for you, you can go in a different direction. You've got to train hard. I mean, sometimes you've got one crack at it. So there's no point cutting corners and doing stuff like that because you'll live to regret it. You've got to kind of go out there. Obviously, you've got to surround yourself with the right kind of people, people you can trust, people who are there for the right reasons, and all of these things are not easy to find. You've got to try and, with me, I always said I spoke to as many fighters as I could before when I turned professional to try and find out, what they said, and hopefully make sure that I didn't, make the same mistakes. And for me, you've got to be aware of your career. Managers, promoters, trainers, everybody else. You know, once you've come and gone, they'll find somebody else. As an individual, you've got to try and sometimes do what is best for you because you've only got one career. So sometimes you have to be a little bit selfish, but also at the same time you've got to be loyal. My trainer Howard, we started from my first fight. He was there to the very end, and I was fortunate because he was a real good trainer. So it's about trying to make the right decision. Sometimes, you hear so many times, if I knew then what I know now, but sometimes you've got to try and use that to try and make the right decisions before it's too late. Because you've seen so many fighters who've made the wrong decisions, taking the wrong fights, and you know they should be certain places in their life now. And because of those decisions, they made the wrong choices. So you've got to try and as an individual, equip yourself with the right information to give yourself the best of chance, to make it. I mean, boxing is a very difficult sport, and you see so many ex-fighters find themselves in bad situations. We just come back from Florida. I think there was about 8 champions. We went on behalf of the ringside charitable trust who are trying to build a hostel for ex-fighters. And I'd say it's quite sad when you see, the older fighters who've sacrificed so much and, had great fights, but, physically they're not in a great shape. Financially, they're not in a great shape. So as I say, everybody, you've got to try and make sure you look out for yourself, and as much as you love fighting and entertaining the crowds, your health is very, very important. And when you finish your career, you want to be in a position where you can enjoy your life after your career is finished.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's some really good advice there, actually, even though there's probably a lot you could give, and I was aware when I asked that it's a very, very broad, far-reaching question, but at the same time, getting a few sort of pearls of wisdom from yourself is a very valuable thing, because there'll be people who will see this that you may never actually meet or whatever, but they can pick up on just these little things that maybe just point them in the right direction just a little bit more. So it's a valuable thing, and yeah, Ringside Charitable Trust, fantastic work, by the way. It's not a question, but just to say, anyone watching this or listening to this who's not aware of anything those guys are doing, it's absolutely incredible work. So that to definitely check that out. Again, Robbie Regan, he told me he was going over there. I think he sent me a couple of photos of everyone all together.
Yeah, we had a good time, Robbie. Yeah.
Yeah. It looked very cool. It looked very, very cool. I've been to Florida. It's nice. It's a very, very nice place. So the last couple of things, because I think with this I said it would be like half an hour, and I think it's been about an hour. So for people's attention spans, I'll wrap it up shortly. The last couple of things to get into is actually two things left. One is I'd like to get your thoughts on basically how you've seen the sport change, because obviously you've been around boxing for many, many years, whether it's obviously as a professional at that level, but also what we were talking about at the beginning. You're still quite involved in boxing, and obviously there's been a few changes. The TV side of things is quite different with everything being pay per view now. To obviously in your day, it was on sort of mainstream TV, and it was quite different. Obviously, there's differences in promotion, social media, and how fighters can reach out to fans. You've got things like sometimes YouTube boxers coming in. I mean, I'm not sure if that's really legitimately, boxing, but you've got sort of fads like that. So in this thing, and I know it's a really big topic, and we could go in different directions with this, but just the things that stand out to you, whether they're positive or negative, I don't mind. In some of the sort of transitions you've seen the sport go through in your years of involvement, and I know this is a big one, but you have been around it as it's changed in some ways for better, probably, but in some ways also for worse. I think it's both. So what are your thoughts on that, like on a sort of boxing then versus now type of thing? And I know this is a big one, but it's just because there's so many ways we could go, but it's just what stands out to you the most really is a thing to.
I think, they say things change, life changes. I mean, obviously back in my time, we had, terrestrial TV, and that was a big one. Everybody used to, that was a great. Everybody in the street, you used to walk along the street, everybody's watching TV, and it was kind of great. And obviously, things changed when Sky became involved, and now obviously it's completely different. You've got streaming, you've got the zone, the social networking. It's completely changed. I think life changes, so you've got to change with the times. And however you are as a sportsman, you've got to try and use whatever is around you to enhance yourself and make the most of it. You know, I think I always think it's better. Not say better. It's always better when you've got more competition. If you've got more promotional outfits out there, it's more opportunity for fighters to shop around and kind of get a better deal. Sometimes particularly the British market is quite closed. There are only one or two outlets you can kind of really go to. And I think competition is always kind of good for everybody because you can shop around and get the best deal and get your worth. I mean, one of the positive things I've seen over the years is particularly women's boxing. Obviously in my time that wasn't too prevalent. Obviously you got Christy Martin and Jane Couch back in the day, but it's kind of great to see people like Katie Taylor and that, filling out arenas and people are kind of getting behind them and doing really well. And that's really taken off really well. a lot better than I thought maybe it would do. So, and it's great for women to have the opportunity to pursue, their career just like we did, or like I did. When I was when I was younger. So that's one of the major benefits I've seen over the years. And initially I wasn't too overly keen on women boxing, but I think they've proved that there are credible fighters out there who are just as capable as the men and put on great fights. And good luck to them.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good insight again, because and I know obviously with the changes there's sort of far too many to go into, but given those are a couple of things that stand out to you, they're really really good points, and I just wanted to get a feel for it, because you've sort of done it all in that way. You've been around it from different points of view, so you have a good perspective on the sport. So it's good to give a mention. Last question then before we wrap this up, is it's sort of a question, but it's more of a little shout out that I like to do, because obviously the sport is nothing without fans and without people supporting the fighters, and people watching this. As I mentioned at the beginning, some of them will be new to your story. Some of them will have heard a bit about you. Some of them probably have watched every fight, or they're those sort of those boxing nuts who watch everything. I mean, I'm close to that, but I do know some people who are more again. So with that in mind, people who sort of supported you, whether they watched you fight back when you're active, whether they recognize you now and they sort of stop you and approach you and things like that. But I'm talking about it from the point of view particularly of loyal people who supported your career, and everyone who's made it possible. Just a shout out to the fans, really. What would you say to people who've watched your fights, followed your career, whether they're supporting something you do now, whether even if it's people who weren't around when you were fighting, and they follow you on social media now, or they message you or something like that. Just want to give those people a shout out, because past, present, or future, champions like yourself, they deserve that respect in the present day, but also obviously when you were actually active boxing, the fans, the sport's nothing without them. So I just like to, if you've got any words to say for them, basically, just to close out, and that's the last question. What would you say to your fans and supporters?
No, obviously a great thank you. I mean, obviously, they're the ones who made it possible. Boxing. I always say boxing's a sport. It's a business and it's entertainment. And if I've entertained them over the years and that, and they've given them a bit of enjoyment, it's kind of great. I think boxing is a great sport, and it really does bring people together of all nationalities. It gives people from not the greatest starts in life. They can go back there and make something. So it's so many things which it can do. And as I say, as a family, the boxing family is always very very strong. And I'm glad I'm part of it, proud that I'm part of it. And they say proud that I've been able to to contribute something to British boxing. And as I say, with me, I always try and impress upon young people, boxing is a noble art of self-defense. You've got to learn to hit and not to get hit. And you want to make sure, as entertaining as you are, when you finish your career, you can still talk, and you leave the sport with as little physical damage as possible. So it's a great sport, and hopefully it can continue being so.
I think so. I think it will. But Champ, we've gotten into some fantastic material here. I'm very happy with it. We've obviously talked about some key fights. Obviously, as I mentioned at the beginning, you've had too many to get into them all. And I know some people like Chris Dixon and people like that. They do these really long, sort of 2-3 hour things. His work's fantastic. My style's different. My people don't have the attention span for that. So we've talked about some key fights, but we've also got into some deeper, some of the deeper side of things as well, which is hopefully a little bit different to your average sort of boxing interview. So the last thing for me to do really is once again just say a big thank you for your time, and just to say honestly, it's been an absolute pleasure, and I've really really enjoyed talking with you, and very grateful for you coming on. Thank you.
Right, it's Bradley, and my pleasure, and good luck with the podcast. Keep up the good work.
I will do. Thank you very much for watching. Please subscribe to the Simply Inspired YouTube channel, and there'll be more videos coming soon.